He's a billionaire who's used to controlling every detail of his life and the massive mansion he lives in. One afternoon, coming home earlier than usual, he walks into the kitchen and sees something he never expected. His new maid is teaching his daughter, a little girl who hadn't smiled in months, how to cook. With flour on the counter, laughter in the air and a spark in his daughter's eyes, he stands there watching in silence until he finally asks what's going on. But what she says next doesn't just leave him speechless. It completely changes the way he sees his daughter, his home, and even himself. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Sophia arrived at the front gates of Alexander Moore's massive mansion carrying a modest suitcase and a quiet determination. The place was impressive. Tall iron gates, a wide driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges, and a building so large it felt more like a hotel than a home. As she stepped inside, she noticed immediately that, despite all the wealth on display, something was off. The air felt heavy. There were no sounds of laughter, no footsteps rushing through the halls, just a strange silence that seemed to follow her. A butler showed her through the marble-floored entrance hall, pointing out the main rooms before leaving her near the kitchen. While Sophia took in her surroundings, she spotted a small girl sitting alone at the far end of the corridor. The girl, Emma, had long brown hair, a pale face, and an expression that showed no interest in anything around her. She didn't look up when Sophia called her name softly. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the floor, her fingers twisting a ribbon she held in her hands. Sophia could tell right away this child wasn't used to talking to strangers. She didn't want to scare her away, so instead of forcing conversation, she thought of a different approach. Sophia opened a cupboard in the kitchen, taking out flour, sugar, and eggs. She began speaking casually, not about cleaning or rules, but about food. "I'm about to make something delicious," she said in a friendly tone. "But I could really use a helper." She paused, then added playfully, "Do you think you could break an egg with one hand?" For the first time, Emma glanced up, curious. Emma didn't answer right away, but her eyes followed Sophia as she moved around the kitchen. Sophia decided not to pressure her, just keeping her tone light and cheerful as she explained what she was doing, cracking eggs, mixing flour, and measuring sugar. After a minute, Emma slid off her chair and stepped closer. She stood quietly at the counter, watching the ingredients pile up in the bowl. Sophia handed her a single egg, showing her how to tap it gently against the edge of the bowl before pulling it apart. "Your turn," Sophia encouraged. Emma tried, her small hands a little unsteady. The egg cracked, but a piece of shell slipped into the bowl. She looked up nervously, expecting to be scolded, but instead Sophia laughed. "That's part of the fun," she said, fishing out the shell with a spoon. Emma's lips curled into the smallest smile. Encouraged, Sophia asked if she wanted to mix the batter. Soon, Emma was stirring carefully, holding the wooden spoon with both hands. The sound of the whisk against the bowl filled the quiet kitchen, and the tension in the air seemed to fade. Sophia kept talking, telling little stories about cooking when she was younger, while Emma began adding ingredients without being told. There was no rush, no instructions barked, just a slow, patient rhythm. By the time the batter was ready, Emma's cheeks had gained a bit of color, and her smile had turned into soft laughter when a little flour dusted onto her shirt. They continued working together, moving from batter to shaping small cookies on the tray. Emma was focused, carefully spooning the mixture and placing it neatly in rows. Sophia let her take the lead, only stepping in to guide her hands when the spoon tilted too far. For the first time since arriving, Sophia felt like she was beginning to understand the quiet girl. She wasn't unfriendly, just hidden away in her own space, maybe lonely. When the tray was ready, they slid it into the oven, and Emma perched on a stool to watch through the glass door as the cookies began to rise. The warm smell started to spread, and Sophia noticed Emma breathing it in deeply, her eyes fixed on the slow change inside the oven. They didn't talk much now, but the silence felt different, softer, more comfortable. Sophia leaned against the counter, keeping an eye on her new little companion. She could see that Emma's guard had lowered just a bit. The girl's ribbon was now sitting forgotten on the counter beside her, and in its place she held a wooden spoon like it was something important. When the timer finally beeped, Emma hopped down, eager to pull the tray out. Sophia helped her with oven mitts, and together they placed the cookies on a cooling rack. Emma giggled when one of them broke in half, stealing a piece before it had fully cooled. That was the moment everything shifted. The sound of footsteps came from the hall, firm and quick, and Sophia turned to see Alexander Moore stepping into the kitchen earlier than expected. His expensive suit and polished shoes contrasted with the casual, almost homey mess they had created. Flour on the counter, a few cracked eggshells in a bowl, and the smell of fresh cookies filling the air. He stopped mid-step when he saw them. His eyes went first to Sophia, then to his daughter, and something in his expression changed. Emma, unaware of his surprise, was still laughing softly as she licked a bit of chocolate from her finger. For Alexander, it was a rare sight. His daughter had barely smiled in months, let alone laughed. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, taking in the scene. Sophia straightened a little, unsure of how he might react, but she didn't speak either. She could feel the weight of the moment, sensing this was important. Alexander's gaze stayed on Emma, as if afraid to break whatever fragile magic was happening. The silence stretched, but it was no longer cold. It was the kind of pause that holds something precious. Then, almost without meaning to, he let out a quiet breath, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly as if to match his daughter's joy. In the days that followed her first meeting with Emma, Sophia decided to keep things simple. She didn't push the girl to talk or play. Instead, she created a quiet ritual. Every late afternoon, around the same time, she would prepare something in the kitchen. Sometimes it was a soup, other times a cake, and sometimes just bread with butter and herbs. She always kept the kitchen door open, not to invite anyone directly, but to let the smells drift into the hall. She didn't speak much about it to the other staff members, and no one seemed to mind her new habit. The first 2 days, Emma didn't appear. Sophia kept going anyway, peeling potatoes, slicing bread, boiling pasta, all while humming softly under her breath. By the 3rd day, she noticed a small shadow in the hallway. She didn't look up right away. She knew it was Emma. The girl was standing just at the edge of the doorway, her small frame leaning against the wall. She wasn't speaking, just watching with those curious, cautious eyes. Sophia kept her hands moving, cutting carrots into thin slices, then dropping them into a pot with a gentle splash. She spoke in a calm voice, describing her actions as if she were talking to herself. "Now the carrots go in. They need to cook until they're soft." She didn't turn around or ask Emma to come closer. She simply went on with her work. The smell of simmering vegetables began to fill the room, and the faint sound of a spoon clinking against the pot seemed to pull Emma in. She stepped forward slowly, her small shoes making almost no sound against the kitchen tiles. She stopped a few feet away from the counter, her eyes following every movement of Sophia's hands. Sophia glanced at her briefly, just enough to smile, then looked back to the cutting board where she was dicing onions. "These will make the soup sweeter," she explained softly, her tone steady and casual. She reached for the salt, adding a pinch to the pot, then gave it a gentle stir. Emma moved another step closer, now standing right beside the counter. Her hand rested on the edge, her fingers tapping lightly as if testing the space. Sophia slid the wooden spoon toward her, not forcing, just offering. "Do you want to stir it?" she asked, keeping her eyes on the pot. Emma hesitated, then took the spoon, giving the mixture a slow, careful turn. Her movements were tentative at first, but soon she found a rhythm, watching the colors blend together in the steaming broth. Sophia didn't correct her or tell her to be careful. Instead, she kept adding ingredients, letting Emma stay part of the process without too much attention on her. From that day, the kitchen began to change. It was no longer just a place for preparing food. It became a small center of warmth in a house that had felt too big and too quiet. Each afternoon, Sophia would be there, chopping, stirring, tasting, and Emma would appear in her own time. Sometimes she helped from the start, other times she just sat at the counter and watched. The smells of fresh bread or simmering stew spread through the hallways, replacing the cold scent of polished furniture and untouched rooms. Little by little, colors began to fill the space. Bright vegetables on the counter, a red tea towel draped over the oven handle, a small plate of cookies cooling by the window. Emma's presence brought small sounds too. The scrape of a chair on the floor, the clink of a spoon, even the occasional giggle when something unexpected happened, like dough sticking to her fingers. No one had told her she had to be there, and that was what made it work. She came because she wanted to, and Sophia treated her as if she had always belonged there. This routine, simple as it was, began to loosen the tension that had once hung in the air. The kitchen, once cold and impersonal, was becoming the heart of the home. Alexander started to notice. At first, it was subtle. He would walk past the kitchen door on his way to his study and hear low voices, the sound of chopping, or Emma's light laughter. One evening, curiosity got the better of him, and he stopped just outside the doorway. Inside, Sophia was kneading dough on the counter, her sleeves rolled up, while Emma dusted flour across the surface. There was no awkwardness, no forced conversation, just a steady flow of small tasks and quiet comfort. Alexander didn't step inside. He stayed leaning against the wall, hidden just enough so they wouldn't notice him. His eyes followed Emma's every move, and for the first time in a long while, he saw her completely engaged in something. She wasn't distracted or closed off. She was there, present in the moment. Her hair had a dusting of flour, and her cheeks were a little flushed from the warmth of the oven. Alexander couldn't help but notice the difference from a few weeks ago, when she barely spoke to anyone. He stayed longer than he intended, watching the way Sophia let Emma take the lead with certain steps, never rushing her, never correcting her harshly. It was as if the kitchen had become a safe space, one where Emma didn't have to be careful about making mistakes. Over the next few days, Alexander's quiet visits became more frequent. Sometimes he arrived just in time to see Emma taste the soup and give Sophia a small nod of approval. Other times, he caught her sitting cross-legged on the counter, peeling peas or breaking chocolate into small pieces. He never interrupted, and they never called him in, but he didn't mind. It was enough to watch, to see the spark of life returning to his daughter bit by bit. The space smelled different now, more lived in, more like a place where real moments happened. Even the other staff had begun to comment that the house felt warmer, though they couldn't explain why. Alexander knew. It was this routine, this quiet connection between Sophia and Emma, that was slowly shifting everything. One evening, as the sun dipped lower outside, he found himself again at the doorway, leaning quietly as Emma stirred a pot with complete focus. Sophia was beside her, explaining something about adding spices, her voice calm and steady. Alexander stayed there, saying nothing, simply taking in the sight of his daughter, engaged, curious, and in her own way, happy again. Sophia was cleaning out one of the lower kitchen drawers, kneeling on the tiled floor with a rag and a small basket to organize the items. Most of what she found was ordinary. Old recipe cards, a couple of broken measuring spoons, and mismatched tea towels folded into uneven piles. As she pushed aside a stack of napkins, her hand touched something different. It was a folded piece of paper, slightly crumpled, the edges soft from being handled many times. Curious, she opened it carefully. The handwriting was uneven, clearly from a child. The words were short and simple, but they made her pause. It was a note from Emma, written to her late mother. The message said she was sorry for not eating the day before and promised she would try to be good. Sophia's chest tightened as she read it. The idea of a child apologizing for something so small and to a mother who was no longer there hit her in a way she couldn't ignore. She didn't know when the note was written, but the paper felt old and the ink had faded slightly. Without making a sound, Sophia folded it exactly as it had been, placing it back in the drawer where she found it. She closed the drawer slowly, as if sealing away the memory, but the words stayed with her. She carried the weight of it quietly, deciding not to mention it to anyone. She knew it wasn't her place to bring it up yet, but she also knew she would never forget it. The rest of the day passed in a quiet routine. Sophia went about her work as usual, preparing meals, tidying the kitchen, and checking small household tasks off her list. She noticed Emma around the house, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes by the window, but they didn't talk much that afternoon. The note had changed the way Sophia looked at the girl. She had always sensed there was pain beneath Emma's silence, but now she had a small piece of proof. That night, after dinner, Sophia was in the kitchen rinsing dishes when she heard soft footsteps behind her. Emma stood there, holding the small stuffed animal she often carried. She didn't speak right away, but her expression was different, less guarded, almost shy. After a pause, she asked quietly, "Can you put me to bed tonight?" It was such a simple request, but Sophia understood it meant something important. Without hesitation, she dried her hands and nodded. They walked together down the hall toward Emma's room, the soft light from the lamps casting warm patches along the carpet. Inside the room, Emma climbed into bed while Sophia pulled the blanket up over her shoulders. Emma lay on her side, hugging her stuffed animal, while Sophia sat in the chair beside the bed. She didn't try to start a conversation or tell a bedtime story. She simply stayed there, present, as Emma's breathing began to slow. Every so often, the girl's eyes would flicker open to make sure Sophia was still there, and each time, she met the same steady, reassuring gaze. Sophia kept her posture relaxed, one hand resting lightly on the armrest, the other folded in her lap. The quiet stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt steady, like a silent promise that she wouldn't leave until Emma was asleep. Slowly, the girl's body loosened, her grip on the stuffed animal relaxing as sleep began to take over. Sophia watched her face soften, the tension in her brow fading little by little. She felt a wave of protectiveness she couldn't fully explain, as if she'd been given a small piece of trust, and it was her duty to protect it. She stayed even after Emma's breathing settled into the slow rhythm of deep sleep, making sure the girl was truly at rest before thinking of moving. At that same moment, the door to the room opened slightly. Alexander stood in the doorway, the light from the hall outlining his figure. He had come to check on his daughter, expecting to see her asleep alone, but instead he found Sophia there, sitting quietly at her bedside. For a moment he didn't move or speak. His eyes shifted from Sophia to Emma, noticing how peaceful his daughter looked, something that had been rare for so long. He felt something stir inside him, something he wasn't prepared for. It wasn't anger or jealousy exactly, but a deep, unfamiliar fear. The sight of his daughter finding comfort in someone else made him realize that this new connection between them was strong, maybe stronger than anything he had managed to give her in months. That thought unsettled him. He stayed in the doorway longer than he meant to, unsure of whether to step in or walk away. The fear wasn't about Sophia herself. It was about losing the role he should have had in his daughter's life. Quietly, he closed the door halfway again, leaving them in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. And as he walked back down the hall, the image of Sophia and Emma stayed with him, a reminder of a bond that was growing faster than he could control. The storm started in the late afternoon, with dark clouds gathering quickly over the mansion. At first, it was just heavy rain tapping against the windows, but soon the wind picked up, rattling shutters and bending the trees in the garden. Sophia was in the kitchen finishing some cleaning when the lights began to flicker. She glanced toward the hallway, already suspecting what was coming. Then, with a short, final blink, the power went out completely. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain pounding against the roof and the distant rumble of thunder. Almost instantly, she heard quick footsteps, and Emma appeared at the kitchen doorway. Her eyes were wide, and she clutched the sleeves of her sweater tightly. Sophia didn't need to ask. She could see the fear on the girl's face. She remembered what Alexander had told her. Emma's mother had died on a rainy day. For Emma, storms weren't just bad weather. They were a painful reminder. Without wasting time, Sophia crouched down to her level and spoke calmly, assuring her that everything was fine. She reached for the small drawer where emergency items were kept and found a few battery-powered lanterns. Instead of just handing one over, Sophia decided to turn the moment into something softer, something less frightening. She took empty glass jars from a cabinet and placed one lantern inside each, letting the light spread in a warm, scattered glow. "These," she told Emma, "are our jars of stars. They'll keep the dark away." Emma's eyes lingered on the jars, curiosity slowly replacing fear. Sophia lined the jars along the hallway floor, creating a small, glowing path. Then she sat down with Emma right in the middle of it. The girl stayed close, still tense, but not as frozen as before. Sophia began to hum an old tune she remembered from her own childhood, one her grandmother used to sing. After a few moments, she softly sang the words, her voice steady and low. Emma leaned against her, holding her stuffed animal in one hand while watching the gentle lights flicker inside the jars. The storm outside didn't stop, but here, in this small stretch of hallway, it felt far away. The minutes passed slowly. The thunder still rolled in the distance, and heavy drops of rain kept falling against the glass, but the glow from the jars of stars made the space feel safe. Emma started to relax, her shoulders lowering, her grip on her stuffed animal easing. Sophia continued singing, repeating the verses in the same calm rhythm. At one point, Emma's lips moved faintly, trying to match the words. Sophia didn't draw attention to it. She simply kept going, letting the moment stay quiet and natural. After a while, Emma rested her head against Sophia's arm, her eyes half closed. The light from the jars reflected faintly on her face, making her features soft in the dimness. Sophia adjusted her position so Emma could lean more comfortably, wrapping one arm loosely around her. She felt the girl's breathing slow down as she drifted towards sleep. The storm outside was still loud, but Emma didn't flinch anymore when the thunder came. The two of them stayed there, surrounded by the soft circle of light, until Emma's breathing evened out completely. It was nearly an hour later when the front door opened. Alexander stepped inside, shaking off the rain from his coat and running a hand through his wet hair. He had been caught outside on business, and his clothes were damp from the downpour. He set his briefcase on a table and glanced toward the hallway, curious about the faint glow coming from the floor. As he walked closer, the sight stopped him in his tracks. Sophia was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, one arm around a sleeping Emma. The girl's head was nestled against her chest, and her small, stuffed animal rested on her lap. Around them, the jars glowed softly, casting small pools of light that flickered with each movement of the lanterns inside. Alexander stayed still, watching without saying a word. He noticed the peaceful expression on Emma's face, so different from the guarded, distant look she often carried. It struck him how completely at ease she seemed, even with the storm still rumbling outside. Alexander stepped forward quietly, not wanting to disturb them. He crouched down beside them, his eyes moving from Sophia to his daughter. A realization began to form in his mind. one that was as uncomfortable as it was clear. He had always believed that keeping Emma safe meant protecting her from harm, keeping her routines stable, making sure she had everything she needed. But as he looked at her now, sleeping in someone else's arms, he saw that safety wasn't the same as comfort. She had been missing more than just physical protection. She had been missing a presence, someone who would simply stay with her when the fear came. That thought weighed on him. He stayed there for a while, the three of them surrounded by the soft glow of the jars, until he finally leaned back against the wall, letting the quiet settle. Outside, the storm kept going, but here, in the warm circle of light, it didn't matter. He found himself watching Sophia more closely now. She wasn't doing anything grand or complicated. She wasn't telling stories or promising that nothing bad would happen. She was simply there, her arms steady around Emma, her body still and calm. Alexander realized that this was something he hadn't given his daughter in a long time. Time without distractions, time without rushing. He felt both grateful and unsettled, unsure of how to step into this role himself. For now, he didn't try. Instead, he adjusted his position, sitting fully on the floor beside them. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stayed there as the minutes stretched on. Every so often, Sophia would glance at him, her expression unreadable, but she didn't break the silence. In that shared quiet, Alexander felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that Emma had found this comfort, and a sharp, lingering fear that if he wasn't careful, he might lose the closeness he wanted to rebuild with her. Still, he stayed. And when the rain finally began to slow outside, the three of them were still there, surrounded by their small, glowing stars. It was a long, narrow space with high windows on both sides and rows of potted plants, most of them drooping from neglect. The tiles on the floor were covered with a thin layer of dust, and the air inside smelled faintly of soil and old leaves. Nobody had stepped inside for a long time. Sophia didn't know much about the room until one quiet afternoon when she and Emma were in the kitchen together. The girl was drawing on a scrap of paper when she paused, looked toward the hallway, and spoke softly. "Mom used to take care of the flowers there," she said, almost as if testing the words. Sophia looked at her but didn't ask questions. She could tell Emma wasn't ready to talk more about it. Instead, she just nodded, letting the moment pass. Later that day, as she walked through the back corridor, Sophia noticed the dusty glass doors for the first time. She didn't open them. She thought about what Emma had said and decided she would wait for the girl to bring it up again rather than pushing her. It took several days before the subject returned. Emma appeared in the kitchen one late morning, holding her stuffed animal and looking hesitant. "Do you want to see it?" she asked. Sophia didn't need to ask what "it" meant. She dried her hands, smiled, and nodded. Emma led her down the hallway to the closed glass doors. She pushed them open with a small effort, and a faint creak echoed as the hinges moved. Inside, the garden was quiet, except for the faint sound of water dripping from somewhere. Most of the plants had wilted, their leaves hanging limp, but a few stubborn ones had small green shoots. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, lighting up dust particles in the air. Sophia stepped inside slowly, letting Emma take the lead. The girl walked along the rows, stopping to point at certain pots. "These were her favorites," she said, touching the edge of a large ceramic planter. She didn't look sad exactly, more thoughtful, like she was remembering details only she knew. Sophia listened, responding only with gentle acknowledgments. She didn't want to turn the visit into a conversation about loss. It felt more important to simply be there. Over the next few visits, the winter garden became a quiet meeting place for them. They didn't go every day, but whenever Emma suggested it, Sophia always agreed. They began bringing small items with them, watering cans, a soft cloth to wipe the dust off the planters, and sometimes a packet of seeds Sophia had found in the pantry. They work side by side, not rushing, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. Emma seemed to know exactly where certain flowers used to grow, pointing to empty pots and describing their colors. Sophia followed her instructions, planting where Emma wanted or carefully trimming leaves when asked. Slowly, the air in the room began to change. The smell of damp soil grew stronger, and a few plants started showing signs of recovery. Emma's steps became more confident in the space, and she spent more time moving from one side to the other, checking progress. It wasn't just the plants that were coming back to life. The garden was becoming a part of her daily world again. One afternoon, while Emma was filling a watering can, Alexander returned home earlier than usual. As he walked through the back hall, he noticed the glass doors were open, a rare sight. Curious, he stepped closer and looked inside. What he saw made him stop. Sophia was kneeling beside a row of small pots, her hands covered with soil as she pressed down fresh earth around a stem. Beside her, Emma was carefully pouring water into another pot, her face intent on the task. There was no awkwardness between them, no sign that this was a forced activity. They moved easily around each other, their focus entirely on the plants. The sunlight made the room look warmer, the green of the leaves more vivid. For a moment, Alexander just stood there, watching. He remembered the last time he had been in that space. It had been with his wife, long before Emma's world had changed. Back then, the garden was full of color and laughter. Now, for the first time in years, it looked alive again. He stepped inside quietly, not wanting to break the rhythm. Emma didn't notice him right away. She was crouched down, inspecting a small flower that had started to bloom. Sophia looked up briefly and gave a polite nod, but didn't stop what she was doing. There was no need for explanations or greetings. The scene spoke for itself. Alexander walked slowly along one of the rows, glancing at the plants, seeing the changes. Some were still struggling, but others looked healthy enough to grow strong again. He realized that this wasn't just about fixing a room or reviving plants. It was about giving Emma a place where she could make new memories, different from the ones shadowed by loss. He stayed for a few minutes, letting the quiet settle around him. In the days that followed, Alexander noticed that Emma talked about the garden more often. She mentioned when a plant looked better, or when she and Sophia had moved pots to catch more sunlight. He could tell that the space was becoming hers again, not as a reminder of what she had lost, but as something living she could care for now. Sophia never made speeches about healing or moving on. She didn't try to explain what the garden meant. She simply let Emma lead, giving her the tools, the time, and the company to shape the space into something new. That was enough. When Alexander thought about the moment he had walked in and seen them together, he understood that some changes didn't need to be planned or pushed. They just needed room to grow. And in the winter garden, both Emma and the plants had found that room. It was a quiet morning in the mansion. Sophia was wiping down the kitchen counter after breakfast when she heard small footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Emma standing in the doorway holding an envelope. The girl didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, clutching it tightly with both hands. Sophia dried her hands on a towel and crouched to be at eye level. "Is that for me?" she asked softly. Emma shook her head and replied in a low voice, "It's for Mom." Her tone was calm, not sad, but there was a certain seriousness in her eyes. Sophia didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and waited. Emma stepped forward, placing the envelope in Sophia's hands. "You can look," she added, almost as if she had rehearsed the words. Sophia opened it carefully, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. Inside was a drawing, done in bright crayon colors. It showed 4 people, Emma, Sophia, Alexander, and a woman floating slightly above them, surrounded by small blue clouds and a yellow sun. Everyone in the picture was smiling. At the bottom, written in uneven letters, were the words, "We are okay now." She helped. She understood instantly who the woman in the sky was. Emma's late mother was drawn with a gentle expression, her arms out as if watching over them. Sophia glanced up at Emma, who stood silently, waiting for a reaction. "It's beautiful," Sophia said quietly. She didn't try to say more because she knew the picture spoke for itself. She carefully refolded the paper and slid it back into the envelope. "Can I show it to your dad?" she asked. Emma nodded without hesitation. Sophia stood, keeping the envelope safe in her hands, and together they walked down the hall toward Alexander's study. When they reached the door, Sophia knocked softly. Alexander's voice called for them to enter, and they stepped inside. He was at his desk, sorting through papers, but looked up immediately when he saw the two of them. Sophia walked closer and held out the envelope. "Emma made this," she said simply. Alexander took it, his brow furrowing slightly in curiosity. He opened the envelope and unfolded the drawing. At first, he just stared at it, his eyes moving slowly from one figure to another. His hand froze halfway through, smoothing the paper on the desk. When he read the words at the bottom, "We are okay now. She helped," he stopped completely. His eyes began to glisten, and he blinked several times, but the tears still came. It was rare for him to show emotion so openly, especially in front of his daughter, but in that moment, he didn't try to hide it. His chest rose and fell more heavily, and he pressed his lips together as if to steady himself. Emma moved toward him without hesitation. She wrapped her arms around his waist and rested her head against him. Alexander let out a shaky breath and placed a hand on her back, holding her close. His other hand still held the drawing, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. Sophia stood a few steps away, not wanting to intrude on the moment, but her presence was part of it. Alexander knew that. After a moment, he looked up at her. His eyes were red, his expression still raw, but there was something else there too: recognition. Without speaking, he extended his free hand toward her. It wasn't just a gesture, it carried a message she could feel. It said he understood what she had done for Emma, and that he was grateful in a way words couldn't express. Sophia stepped forward and took his hand briefly, giving a small, steady squeeze before letting go. They didn't fill the silence with explanations or long speeches. Emma stayed in her father's arms, and Alexander stayed still, as if grounding himself in the moment. The drawing lay open on the desk, its colors bright against the dark wood. Sophia knew it would probably stay there for a long time, not hidden away in a drawer, but kept where Alexander could see it every day. For him, it wasn't just a child's drawing. It was proof of a change, a shift he had been hoping for, but hadn't known how to create on his own. For Emma, it was a message, one she had managed to give without fear or hesitation. And for Sophia, it was a quiet confirmation that everything she had done, the patience, the small routines, the gentle presence, had been worth it. Alexander's hand dropping back to his side didn't end the gesture he had made toward her. It only made it clear that it didn't need words to last. It was late in the afternoon, and the backyard was full of movement. Emma was running across the grass, holding a small ball, laughing as Sophia tried to catch her. The air was warm, and the light from the setting sun stretched long shadows across the yard. Alexander appeared at the back door, still in his work clothes, but with his jacket off. He watched for a moment before stepping down onto the grass. "Need another player?" he asked, and Emma shouted yes without hesitation. Sophia smiled lightly, handing the ball to the girl so she could start the next round. They made up simple rules as they went along, tossing the ball, chasing each other in wide loops, and laughing when someone missed a catch. For a man who usually seemed controlled and serious, Alexander was surprisingly quick, darting around Emma to block her path and making exaggerated moves to make her laugh harder. Sophia joined in, weaving between them, the game becoming more chaotic by the minute. At one point, Alexander lunged to intercept a pass Sophia made to Emma. His shoes slid on the slightly damp grass, and in an instant he lost his balance. Sophia moved to catch him, but instead of steadying him, the momentum pulled her down too. They fell together, hitting the ground with a thud. Sophia landed partly on her side, partly against him, and for a moment they just lay there, both laughing at how ridiculous it looked. Emma giggled from a few steps away, clearly entertained. As the laughter began to fade, Sophia realized Alexander's hand was still on her arm. They were close enough that she could see the shift in his expression, still smiling, but softer now, almost curious. Neither of them spoke. Their eyes met, and the rest of the yard seemed to go still for a moment. Without thinking too much about it, Alexander leaned in, and Sophia didn't move away. Their lips met briefly. Just a light kiss, over in seconds, but it was enough to leave a weight in the air. They pulled back almost at the same time, both clearly aware of what had just happened. Alexander was the first to speak. His voice was calm but firm. "That was a mistake," he said, his gaze steady on her. He didn't say it with anger, but with a certain finality, as if drawing a line neither of them should cross again. He glanced toward Emma, who was now busy rolling the ball in the grass, then back at Sophia. "You are important in her life," he continued, "and I need that to stay exactly as it is." Professional. She simply nodded, her face neutral, though inside her thoughts were racing. She knew he was right to protect Emma from any confusion, but that didn't erase the fact that the kiss had happened. She pushed herself up from the ground, brushing grass from her clothes. Alexander stood as well, and without another word, they resumed the game with Emma, pretending as if nothing had changed. But both of them felt the shift, unspoken but undeniable. In the days that followed, the change between them became clearer. They still spoke when necessary, still coordinated about Emma's routines and needs, but something in their tone was different. There was more space between them, small, subtle, but always present. Sophia noticed Alexander avoided moments where they might be alone together. He was polite, respectful, but careful. She matched his approach, keeping her interactions with him focused strictly on Emma or household matters. For Emma, nothing seemed unusual. Her laughter and energy around them remained the same. But for Sophia and Alexander, the memory of that brief moment in the backyard lingered, unspoken yet impossible to erase. The backyard itself felt different to Sophia now. Every time she stepped outside, she remembered the fall, the laughter, and the few seconds when everything had paused before the kiss. She didn't dwell on it openly, but it stayed in her mind, a mix of warmth and caution. Alexander carried it too, though he showed no sign of wanting to revisit the subject. Instead, they both carried on, bound by the unspoken agreement he had set that day. And yet, under the surface, the air between them held that quiet tension, a reminder that some lines once approached can never be unseen, even if they're never crossed again. The argument started in the late afternoon, in the middle of a conversation about Emma's schoolwork and routines. It wasn't loud or full of shouting, but the tension was obvious. Alexander believed Emma needed stricter rules, more discipline in her daily life. Sophia disagreed, saying the girl had already been through too much and needed space to feel safe before anything else. They went back and forth for several minutes, each trying to explain their side, neither willing to fully give in. Emma had been in the living room, coloring quietly at the table. But at some point during the exchange, she disappeared without either of them noticing. When the discussion finally ended in silence, Sophia glanced toward the living room and felt a jolt. Emma's chair was empty, and her coloring book was left open on the table. She called her name, first softly, then louder, but there was no answer. Alexander joined in the search, checking the kitchen, the hallways, and even the backyard. The more time passed without finding her, the heavier the worry became. As Sophia stood in the hallway, thinking of possible places Emma might go, a memory surfaced. Emma had once mentioned a glass house, an old greenhouse at the far edge of the property. that no one used anymore. It had been years since Sophia had even thought about it, but something in her gut told her that's where the girl might be. Without wasting time, she grabbed a light sweater and hurried outside, her shoes crunching over the gravel path. The air was cooler than inside, and the garden was quiet except for the faint sound of leaves moving in the wind. She walked quickly, her eyes fixed on the path ahead until the shape of the greenhouse came into view, its glass panels cloudy with dust and streaks from rain over the years. The door was slightly ajar. Sophia stepped closer and gently pushed it open, the hinges creaking. Inside, the air was warmer and smelled faintly of damp earth. Rows of old pots and wooden shelves lined the walls, most covered in cobwebs. In the far corner, behind an overturned crate, she saw a small movement. "Emma?" Sophia called softly. There was a pause, and then Emma's face appeared, her eyes wide and her cheeks flushed. She looked frightened, but not from being alone. Sophia crouched down and moved closer, careful not to rush her. "I thought you left," Emma said in a small voice, clutching her stuffed animal tightly. "Like the others." Sophia's chest tightened at the words. She understood now. This wasn't just about hiding. It was about fear of losing someone again. She reached out her hand, palm up. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I'm here because I want to be, not because someone made me. And I'm staying." Emma stared at her for a long moment before slowly placing her small hand in Sophia's. Just then, the sound of footsteps approached from outside, and Alexander appeared in the doorway. His expression shifted from worry to relief the moment he saw them. He stepped inside, his eyes moving from Sophia to Emma. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice lower than usual. "I didn't mean for our talk to make you feel like that." He crouched down so he was at Emma's level. "No one is sending Sophia away. She's part of this, and she's not going anywhere." Emma looked between them, as if making sure they both meant it. Alexander gave a small nod to Sophia, not as an apology for their disagreement, but as an acknowledgement of the trust she had built. The tension from earlier seemed to fade just a little. Sophia gave Emma's hand a reassuring squeeze before standing, helping her to her feet. The three of them walked back toward the house together. Emma kept her hand firmly in Sophia's, her steps slowing whenever she felt Sophia's grip loosen. Alexander walked on the other side, glancing occasionally at them but not interrupting the quiet. The air felt different now, not fully light, but calmer. By the time they reached the back steps, the sun was dipping lower, casting a warm glow across the yard. Inside, Emma didn't let go of Sophia's hand until they reached the living room. Alexander stood nearby, watching them. Something shifted in his expression, not dramatic, but clear enough. He was starting to realize that whatever was happening here didn't fit the image of family he had once had in his mind. It wasn't traditional, and it wasn't planned, but it was forming all the same. He didn't say anything more that evening, but the thought stayed with him. Seeing Emma so firmly attached to Sophia and seeing how Sophia responded without hesitation made it impossible to ignore that this was more than an arrangement or a job. It was a bond that had been built slowly through small moments and quiet promises, and it was becoming the foundation of something real. Alexander knew that accepting it might mean letting go of some of his old ideas, but as he watched them settle in together on the couch, Emma between them, he couldn't deny that this, exactly as it was, felt more solid than anything he had imagined before. Sophia had been thinking about it for days, the feeling growing stronger with each small moment she shared with Emma and the unspoken tension with Alexander. What had started as a job was now tangled with emotions she wasn't sure she should have. She told herself it wasn't right to stay if the lines between personal and professional kept blurring. That morning, before anyone else was awake, she sat at the kitchen table with 2 envelopes in front of her. One was addressed to Emma, written in careful, simple words that a child could understand. She thanked the girl for trusting her, reminded her how brave she was, and told her to keep watering the plants in the winter garden. The other letter was for Alexander. That one was shorter, more formal, but still honest. She explained that she believed leaving was the best choice for everyone. She folded both letters, placed them where they would be found easily, and then quietly gathered her bag. The house was silent, except for the faint sound of rain outside, which had been falling since dawn. She moved through the hallway, taking one last look at the rooms that had become so familiar. Passing the kitchen, she hesitated when she saw Emma's drawing, still pinned to the side of the refrigerator, the one with the 4 of them, and the message, "We are okay now." She helped. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to keep walking. At the front door, she took her umbrella, stepped outside, and made her way toward the gate at the edge of the property. The gravel crunched under her shoes, and the rain tapped steadily against her umbrella. She told herself not to look back. Each step felt heavier, as if part of her wanted to stop, but she pushed forward, repeating silently that this was for the best. She reached the gate and placed her bag on the ground to find the key to unlock it. Just as she slid the key into the gate's lock, a voice called her name. She turned, startled, and saw 2 figures running toward her through the rain. Emma was in front, holding a large piece of cardboard above her head, though it was already damp and curling at the edges. Alexander was right behind her, no umbrella, his clothes soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead. When they reached her, Emma turned the cardboard toward her. Written in thick, uneven letters was a message, "Please stay." The words were big and messy, clearly made in a hurry, but there was no mistaking the meaning. Sophia stood frozen, her hands still on the gate, as Emma looked up at her with wide, pleading eyes. Alexander was breathing hard, water dripping from his jaw. He didn't waste time with explanations. "We don't need perfect," he said, his voice steady despite the rain. "We just need you." His words hung in the air, simple but direct. Sophia felt her throat tighten, the tension she'd been carrying spilling over all at once. Emma stepped forward, her free hand clutching Sophia's. "You said you wouldn't leave," the girl reminded her softly, almost like she had the day in the greenhouse. Sophia's umbrella slipped a little as her grip on it loosened. She looked between them, Emma's tearful, hopeful face and Alexander's steady gaze, and something inside her gave way. The reasons she had told herself for leaving didn't feel as strong as they had an hour ago. She realized that leaving wasn't protecting anyone. It was just running away from what they had built together. Sophia knelt down so she was eye level with Emma. "Okay," she said, her voice thick. "I'll stay." Emma's face lit up instantly, and she threw her arms around Sophia's neck. Alexander let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. The rain kept falling, soaking through Sophia's sweater, but she didn't care. Alexander reached for her bag and slung it over his own shoulder. "Let's go inside," he said, his tone softer now. The 3 of them walked back toward the house together, Emma in the middle, holding Sophia's hand tightly. The gravel path was wet and slippery, but their steps felt lighter than before. Inside, the warmth of the house wrapped around them, replacing the chill of the rain. Sophia set her umbrella aside, and Alexander placed her bag back near the stairs, as if it had never been touched. Emma disappeared for a moment, only to return with a towel, insisting Sophia dry her hair. Alexander stood nearby, watching them, a faint smile on his face, not the polite one he often wore, but something real. For the first time in days, the air between them wasn't tense. It felt different, calmer, clearer. The fear of losing what they had was replaced by the relief of knowing it was still there. They didn't talk about what had just happened at the gate. They didn't need to. In that quiet, shared understanding, they all knew they had chosen the same thing, to stay. And as the rain continued outside, the three of them settled back into the house, not as employer, employee, and child, but as something that was starting to feel like a family again. It had been months since the day at the gate, and life inside the mansion had settled into a new kind of normal. The kitchen, once a quiet and impersonal space, had become the heart of the home. That afternoon, it was filled with movement and the smell of vanilla as Sophia and Emma worked side by side at the counter, preparing a cake. Emma was more confident in the kitchen now. She cracked eggs without hesitation, measured flour with practiced hands, and even reminded Sophia when it was time to check the oven's preheat light. Laughter came easily between them, little jokes about who was messier or who had the better mixing technique. On the other side of the counter, Alexander leaned against a stool, watching for a while before deciding to join in. He rolled up the sleeves of his shirt, took the whisk from Sophia's hand, and began stirring with exaggerated seriousness, making Emma giggle so hard she almost dropped a spoon. The three of them moved around each other with ease, no awkward pauses, no hesitation, just a shared rhythm that had built up over time. The cake batter was ready sooner than expected, and while it baked, they busied themselves with cleaning the counter and preparing the icing. Alexander tried to pipe decorative swirls on a practice plate, failing spectacularly, which sent Emma into another round of uncontrollable laughter. Sophia shook her head, smiling, and showed him how to hold the piping bag properly. The air was warm, the sound of the oven humming softly in the background, and the smell of the cake began to fill the room. It was in moments like this, simple, ordinary moments, that the changes of the past months were most visible. Emma no longer hovered at the edges of the room or kept her distance. She was fully present, teasing her father, wiping flour from Sophia's cheek, moving around the kitchen as if it belonged to her. Alexander seemed different too, more relaxed, more willing to be part of the small, messy moments instead of just observing from a distance. When the cake was cooled and covered in icing, Emma ran to the living room and came back holding an old camera. "We need a picture," she announced. Without waiting for an answer, she placed the camera on the counter and set the timer. Sophia stood on one side of Emma, Alexander on the other. Emma reached up and took both of their hands, pulling them closer so that their shoulders touched. The camera clicked, catching the three of them smiling, a little out of breath from laughing. After the photo was taken, Emma stayed in place for a second, looking up at them. "What are we now?" she asked suddenly, her voice curious but not unsure. Alexander glanced at Sophia, then looked back at his daughter. He tightened his hold on her hand and reached across to take Sophia's as well. His answer was simple. "We're a family." There was no pause, no second guessing, just the plain truth, spoken with certainty. Emma's face lit up, and she hugged them both tightly before darting off to find a frame for the photo. Sophia stayed where she was, her hand still in Alexander's for a brief moment longer. Neither of them spoke, but there was no need. The answer he had given was enough for both of them. Emma returned with a small wooden frame she had found in a drawer, and together they slipped the picture inside. She placed it on the kitchen counter, propping it up against the wall near the spot where the three of them had been cooking. It wasn't perfect. One corner of the frame was chipped and the photo was slightly tilted, but none of that mattered. The picture caught something real, a connection built not from obligation, but from choice. The rest of the afternoon passed with the easy flow they had found together. They cut slices of the cake and ate them at the counter, still warm, the icing melting slightly on the edges. Emma made sure the photo stayed in its place, glancing at it every so often with a small smile. For Sophia, it was a reminder of how far they had all come. From the silent, closed-off days in the beginning to now, when the house was filled with warmth and movement. For Alexander, it was proof that the idea of family didn't have to look like the one he had imagined before. It could be something different, something they had created together piece by piece. And for Emma, it was simply what it felt like to be safe and loved. As the light outside began to fade, the photo stayed in its place on the counter, a quiet reminder to all of them that family was never just about blood. It was about choosing to stay, to show up, and to be there for each other, every single day. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.